Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are working on Ahsoka Season 2. They ended Season 1 with a bunch of cliffhangers and questions. There were some huge storylines that they left completely wide open, like the Mortis gods. There's a bunch of stuff they've already confirmed, and we have a pretty good idea for what's happening next in this part of the timeline, so we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. I'll be doing more videos for The Mandalorian Season 4, and the Skeleton Crew series is actually like the next series in the timeline that will cross over with everything, but that won't premiere till around spring 2024. But just starting with the biggest stuff, what's happening with the Mortis gods in live action? Really cool to see Dave Filoni do this. The funny thing is, originally it was George Lucas's idea to create the Mortis gods for the Clone Wars. So a lot of people, if you're wondering what was the deal with them during the Clone Wars, George Lucas wanted to introduce them into the canon.
The story that George laid out for us was something that I think that we'd all, as Star Wars fans, as lovers of mythology, wanted to delve into for a very long time, which was a much more intensive look at the Force and Force wielders and how that's used, and this whole prophecy of the Chosen One, and what does that mean?
Are you the one?
The one what?
I was actually out of the room for the first, I think, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of George's pitch of these Force wielders, and I remember coming back in the room, and the writers were all just kind of wrapped up, like looking at George. And they saw me come in the room, and they looked at me, and they're like, "You got to hear this." And George sat me down, and he started explaining to you that these gods, and they wield the Force, they're much more powerful than any Jedi Knights. And this one turns into a gargoyle, and this one can turn into a griffin. He's just saying all this stuff. On your feet! I was like, wow, this is pretty intense.
That whole storyline came from him, and Dave Filoni just kind of adapted it to the page. But what is Baylan Skoll trying to do with them, and what is Dave Filoni going to do with the character of Baylan Skoll since Ray Stevenson passed away before the series premiered? May he rest in peace. No joke, he was one of the most interesting things about this season. I was a little disappointed there was so little of the character. It kind of feels like Dave Filoni wrote a bunch more stuff for him and Shin Hati on the page, then wound up cutting a lot of their scenes for budget reasons. But that Mortis Gods teaser at the end was enough to answer most of the big questions, like the what of it all. During that final scene, we see him standing on the statue of the Father on the fist, staring out at a beacon on a mountain in the distance, as if the Father is pointing to the mountain. Next to it is a statue of the Son, and then next to them is a crumbling statue of the Daughter. This broken because they're ancient statues. Like the statues were meant to have been built by the ancient witch kingdom of the Dathomir thousands of years ago, during the height of their civilization. That's why you see the statues all around the planet's surface, but the other statues are meant to look like the same statue above the Night Sisters' coven on Dathomir during the Clone Wars that Mother Talzin ruled over. That figure that they depict, I think, is meant to be an ancient Night Sister, probably one of the ancient great members of their order, in the way the Sith have statues to Darth Revan, the other ancient Sith from the Old Republic era. But the whole idea here is that the ancient Night Sisters of this ancient witch kingdom built statues to the Mortis gods, meaning they also probably worshipped them and used their power. And this goes back to the history of the universe that the Father told to Anakin during the Mortis episodes when he visited them in the Clone Wars. There's like this whole untold history of the universe that Anakin gets, like a big info dump on what happened many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago.
History of the Galaxy, Parts 1, 2, and 3.
1 being the best, of course.
The Father told him that in ancient times, the Mortis gods walked amongst humans in the mortal realm like the normal universe, and their level of power and influence over the Force was so great that it caused all kinds of calamities and collateral damage, even though they didn't necessarily intend to do that. Just the fact that they were sitting around in the mortal realm caused so much chaos and shifts between the dark side, the light side, wars everywhere, so much death and destruction. The whole idea is that because the Son was the conduit of the dark side of the Force, he would cause this huge rise in the power of the dark side of the Force, the level of the dark side in the universe, causing way more wars, death, destruction. Generally, the dark side would hold sway over the entire universe, like darkest timeline kind of stuff. Then on a dime, it would shift to the light side when the daughter would do the same thing and she would hold sway over the universe. And the Father would be constantly trying to create balance between the dark and the light to stop the entire universe from being destroyed. The Father said that eventually what happened is that he removed the three of them to the pocket dimension called the Mortis realm, but even though they weren't physically touching the mortal plane, the normal universe, the three of them still had a lot of influence over the state of the galaxy, dark, light, and the balance between them. So that's how powerful they were. Like they were in an alternate dimension, but they still had this extreme influence over the galaxy. That's why the Son tried to trick Anakin the others into releasing him from the Mortis realm so they could go back to the main universe. If that had happened, it would have been lights out for the universe. Like the power and influence of the dark side would become so great that someone like Emperor Palpatine would gain God tier power compared to his normal level of power. It would basically boost all the natural power levels of all dark side force users no matter what. During the series, though, they hint that the fall of the ancient witch kingdom of the Dathomir, the ancient Night Sisters' huge empire, was because of something connected to the Mortis gods, probably the sun. Most of the power that they wield seems like it has a twinge of darkness, like we give you a gift of shadows to Morgan Elsbeth, clearly very dark side terminology here. The way the Night Sisters tap into the Force, though, is a little bit different, so it's not quite as binary as light side and dark side. That was what Baylan Skoll was talking about when he said that we are no Jedi, but they're also not Sith either. Going back to the whole concept of the Mortis gods, like the Son tells the others, I am not Sith, I'm not merely Sith, I'm much more than that. The Bendu kind of gets into that too, like the way he wields the Force in a much more complete way, dark side and light side together. What I think Dave Filoni is doing here is saying that the father's story about the reason they left the mortal realm was because of the trouble they caused, and it had something to do with the fall of the witch kingdom of the Dathomir. Like they started to be influenced by the sun, the race grew in power, like they turned into an empire, but ultimately it caused their destruction. Then the father took the three of them to the Mortis realm. So you have to remember, this is happening hundreds of thousands of years, like a long time ago in the past. Morgan Elsbeth said that it was before time itself was recorded, meaning that it predated the beginning of the original Jedi Order. And that goes back about 35,000 years. We're going deep into like stuff that predates Knights of the Old Republic. I also think these three main Night Sister Great Mothers went into hibernation until Thrawn and Morgan Elsbeth woke them up. During the series, they say that Thrawn and the others woke them up, quote unquote. I think that's meant to be a literal thing. Like these three Night Sisters, Claudia Black being the main one, even though they kind of exist in a trinity with equal power. Her name is Clotho. They're each named for the three Greek fates who would perceive destiny. I think that these three were actually from that ancient witch kingdom and survived it, just spent thousands of years in hibernation until Thrawn arrived and woke them up, and that explains how they survived until present day, and now they're basically trying to bring back the witch kingdom of the Dathomir in present day with Thrawn's help, and that's why they're agreeing to work with him. But this explains how those three survived to present day many thousands of years. They were basically just in deep storage. Those raiders on the planet that we met, I think are just meant to be the long descendants of the Night Sisters and the Night Brothers from that era. But this kind of explains why they kept saying there was this pall of death and decay over the Peridea planet, like something terrible happened here. They're probably talking about what those ancient Mortis gods did originally. Is basically the wasteland left over from the things that the Mortis gods did to the witch kingdom and that eventually caused this calamity that created the downfall of their race. Now in present day though, Baylan Skoll seems like he's trying to find a place on the planet, like that mountain in the distance with the beacon, that will give him access to the Mortis realm. He could also be looking to enter the world between worlds too, because the Mortis gods had a mural near the entrance of Mortis during Rebels. So their appearance on the series could also herald another entrance to the world between worlds. Either way, it looks like Baylan Skoll is planning to end the cycle of all war in the universe. That's what he said he wants to do. Like, we don't want any more Order 66s, so he wants to end all war everywhere in the universe. And in order to do that, he would need the power on the level of the Mortis god, so he could be seeking to make himself a new Mortis god. Now, unless Dave Filoni changes the Mortis gods' backstory, in present day, the original Mortis gods were supposed to have died during the Clone Wars. The exception to this is the Mirai Owl and Ahsoka herself. So Mirai contains some of the life force of the daughter. We saw her during the episode, like Ahsoka sees the owl, but the owl shows up every time that Ahsoka shows up. Like she helped Ezra and Ahsoka when they were in the world between worlds, and then on The Mandalorian when Ahsoka debuted during season 2, we also saw the Mirai Owl there too. Part of the reason why there's such a strong connection between Mirai and Ahsoka is because they both contain life force of the daughter. Literally, Ahsoka has the life force of the daughter. Back during the Mortis episodes, Ahsoka was about to die, and the daughter essentially gave her remaining life force to bring her back to life, to heal her. So in present day, Mirai and Ahsoka are like the last living remnants of the daughter, avatars of the daughter. Now, I don't know if Dave Filoni is going to turn that into something bigger. Like some of you asked me if this means Ahsoka will become the daughter's replacement as a Mortis god herself, in the way that Anakin is kind of replacing the Mortis gods. The father basically told Anakin this was his destiny, to bring balance to the Force, but on a more cosmic scale. And remember, this is George Lucas's idea to create that storyline, so he wanted Anakin to take over balance of the Force in a more cosmic way. That's the funny thing with theories like that, when people are like, no, that sounds crazy. Why would Anakin ever become a god? Well, it was George Lucas's idea to have this god tell him that he was going to replace him eventually. When you hear about some of the deleted scenes from the prequels and the original trilogy, George Lucas did have a lot of really crazy ideas that just never wound up on the actual final cuts. But that's why in present day, you're seeing all this weird stuff like this Force lore, the Mortis gods, start to take shape in live action, because George Lucas had all these really big ideas that he wanted to start in the animated episodes. So this means that if Baylan Skoll wants to use the power of the Mortis gods and eventually winds up becoming one of the Mortis gods or similar to one of them, he could become like the new version of the Sun, even if that's not entirely what he's planning. He's probably just trying to use the power of the Mortis gods. In an early theory, it'll wind up driving him mad, and Anakin and Ahsoka will have to do something to stop him from destroying the universe unintentionally. Kind of the same way the brother eventually would have done that had Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, and Anakin not stopped him from leaving Mortis. But I think we're all on the same page, though, that Dave Filoni will have to recast Ray Stevenson's Baylan Skoll character. He's just way too big for them to not continue that story arc. They might just fast-track Ahsoka Season 2 and do that after The Mandalorian Season 4, and just continue all these plot threads during that instead of waiting for the Thrawn movie. Before the season premiered, my theory was they would just do a full trilogy of Thrawn movies if the first one works out, like if it does well financially, and they just cover the rest of all those storylines over the next 7 to 8 hours of that movie trilogy. But I think their idea now is that they'll just do seasons of Ahsoka, The Mandalorian, Skeleton Crew, between the Thrawn movies, any other spin-offs they want to do, and that'll give them the time to stretch these movies out so they don't have to rush them out too quickly. You also have to remember the way that they pace things out, like it was a glacial pace during Ahsoka Season 1. It'll be like that on The Mandalorian Season 4, the other series. Like it's probably going to be a while before we get answers to a lot of these questions. That also means that if there's a crossover between Ahsoka Season 1 and The Mandalorian Season 4, it'll probably be through Ezra Bridger's character and the New Republic characters like Carson Teva. He was kind of the Mandalorian Season 3 crossover character during Ahsoka Season 1, like standing up, hey everybody, remember all the stuff we just did in The Mandalorian Season 3? Basically reminding everybody about what was going on with the Mandalorians in present day. They'll probably have a similar type of moment during The Mandalorian Season 4, maybe like another Zeb cameo scene because he's a Rebels character and he's on Carson Teva's team. And what they might do to get the Mandalorians involved in the war against Thrawn is basically do what they did during The Mandalorian Season 3. So Carson Teva went to the Mandalorians and told them about everything because the New Republic didn't want to believe that there was a threat. So during The Mandalorian Season 4, you have to imagine Carson Teva and Ezra Bridger going to Mando, Grogu, the Mandalorians, and saying, hey look, there's this giant fleet, Thrawn is back, he brought a bunch of Night Sisters with him, there's a zombie army that they're going to resurrect, and that explains how the Mandalorians wind up in the Thrawn movie. The next big teaser was Ahsoka taking the Sword of Talzin that the Night Sisters gave to Morgan Elsbeth. Remember, that's the exact same sword that Mother Talzin used during the Clone Wars, and during the episode, they literally used their Force abilities to pull it across galaxies, across space and time, to give it to Morgan Elsbeth. Too bad they can't pull each other across galaxies. That would come in really handy. What'll probably happen is the sword will slowly begin to corrupt Ahsoka and influence her the same way the Sith holocron influenced Ezra Bridger during the Rebels episode. He got darker and darker until Kanan gave it to the Bendu. They'll probably give Ahsoka a similar type of arc that Ezra had with that holocron. Meanwhile, Ezra, back in the main galaxy, will probably spend most of his time with Hera, the New Republic, trying to convince them of the threat of Thrawn, who is now back on Dathomir with the Night Sisters. And Thrawn and the Night Sisters will be preparing to resurrect those dead bodies in the caskets, marshal the forces of the Shadow Council, the Remnant Empire. That'll take some time to gather all those forces, but Dathomir will be their staging point. That'll probably continue to go on in the background during The Mandalorian Season 4, and Grogu and Mando will just hear about it through Carson Teva and Ezra. Like I said, early idea is that they just warn him about Thrawn and the Night Sisters. That little teaser with Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost at the end is probably going to pick up at the beginning of Season 2, and he will help Ahsoka figure out a way to get back and what to do next just in general, tying back into this whole Mortis Gods Baylan Skoll plot. As for Luke Skywalker and his Jedi Academy, everybody wondering when they're going to involve Luke in the story, I think that if they fast-track Ahsoka Season 2, then they'll just save his next cameo for that Thrawn movie, giving them enough time to introduce these other characters and flesh out these other storylines, and get better with their deepfake technology so that when they do Luke again, it looks way, way better. But the whole idea with Sabine and now Grogu is that they're like the next Mandalorian Jedis after Tar Vizsla, the person who created the Darksaber. A lot of you are also asking if Cal Kestis and Merrin will show up during this storyline because they're alive in this part of the timeline. They're saving live-action Cal Kestis, so after the third game in his trilogy, which he actually just confirmed himself that they're working on right now. The problem with that is it usually takes them about 4 years to get those games out, so I'm not really expecting live-action Cal Kestis until after 2026. They could also swerve on that idea and just give them their own live-action series, and it'd totally be fine. There's enough material with all those characters to do their own series that could run for 7 seasons. But I'm sure everybody has 1,000 more questions about all the characters and what's happening next in the timeline, so post them all in the comments below. Right now, the Skeleton Crew series is supposed to pick up the next part of the story, but that's like a totally new group of characters in a totally new part of the galaxy. It's supposed to take place in the unknown regions, but they also might wind up in that new Peridia galaxy, the other galaxy. The other big reminder is that my Loki Season 2 Episode 1 video will post next. Be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. And congratulations to Gary from Brooklyn. You're the giveaway winner from my last big Star Wars video. Please email me on the About page of my channel so I can get your contact details. But everyone, click here for my full Ahsoka Episode 8 video, and click here to learn how Anakin Skywalker is becoming a Mortis God. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe, and this is the way.